Part 1, I built a foundation of what I thought were solid, valid assumptions about what I would expect from a God that was worthy of my worship. It quickly narrowed down to the monotheistic Western world religions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Prophecy seemed to be the final key that excluded all others and zeroed in on Christianity, but more specifically the Bible, as only Christianity had time-based prophecies in their scriptures. But finding the correct interpretation might be tricky among 30,000 denominations. Again, I turned to the scriptures and commentaries, checking out what other people have written, and quickly zeroed in on the books of Daniel and Revelation, as they had the most prophecies that seemed to indicate the rise and fall of nations before the end of evil. Luckily, I quickly found out that there were four major groupings of interpretation: preterist, historicist, futurist, and idealist. After wading through a lot of regurgitated garbage, I found a comparative commentary called Revelation Four Views, a Parallel Commentary, that highlighted the four different interpretations of the book of Revelation. The author has a slant towards preterists, but somewhat tries to be unbiased, unsuccessfully. It's all just too bad he didn't cover Daniel as well. The four views are: 1. Historicist, a view that all prophecies have been fulfilled throughout history and maybe a little bit into the future. Some are still being fulfilled today. This is the view that my concept of God seems partial to. A loving God showing us the end from the beginning, giving us waymarks and signposts along the way. But I still assess the other viewpoints to see what they offer. The second one is preterist, or historico-critical, a view that everything happened before the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD. At least for the book of Daniel, it roughly aligns with what might be taught at a secular university. All of Daniel would have occurred before the Maccabees in 168 BC, which is when Daniel is assumed to have been written by the preterist. A variant called partial preterism extends this to the fall of Rome in 476 AD, but still has no messages for the last 1500 years. Futurist, this is number 3, a view that everything is still in the future. There's really been no fulfilled prophecies for the last 2,000 years. And the fourth one, spiritual, sometimes called symbolic or idealist, a view that everything portrays a cosmic conflict in the spiritual realm, which may or may not have historical fulfillments. Reading various commentaries, both online and in books, I would see different interpretations attacking each other in an effort to show that they were right and the others were incorrect. I started tabulating points and counterpoints. I soon found that preterists and futurists never seemed to defend the apparent holes in their interpretation, but would consistently poke at the same holes over and over again in each other's methodologies, largely ignoring historicists and idealists. And preterists and futurists seem to have some pretty large, insurmountable holes. Maybe the scholars just seem to consistently be coming up short, which suggested to me that their interpretation might not be correct. Maybe something was getting twisted along the way. When and where did preterist and futurist interpretations start anyways? As it appears that for 15 to 1800 years the majority of Christianity utilized the historicist approach. But today it's used only by marginal Christian groups. Today it appears the majority of Christianity espouses the future interpretation, often with some idealist leanings. And a small conservative portion uses the preterist interpretation. Although while both preterist and futurist appear to indicate there have been no fulfilled prophecies or signs for the last 1500 years, and that every church father was wrong, which doesn't really align with the principles of a loving God that I'm looking for. If preterist or futurism were correct, then there really wasn't much difference between them and the founding or end-time prophecies that I had previously cast aside, which would be a large setback in my quest for God. In my opinion, historicist continues to be the closest to what I was looking for, a loving God giving waymarks and signposts that the time was nearly up. The idealist approach seemed to be great for finding out what symbols mean using the Bible as its own interpreter, but it seems to be missing any real application to reality or even to spiritual life. One of the book sets I acquired was the Church Fathers collection. It consisted of 3 series, the Ante-Nicene, Nicene, and Post-Nicene Church Fathers, in both digital format and hardcover. The biggest problem I perceived with historicism is that there's a lot of differing interpretations. Historicist commentators over the last 1500 to 1800 years never quite seemed to agree with each other about fulfillment, especially fulfillment near the commentator's own time. But there doesn't seem to be any problems with the way historicists treat the Greek and Hebrew texts and contexts, just some minor disagreement about what should be symbolic and what should be literal. Overall historicism has very few grammatical holes, it seems, and the ones that they do get poked at, I have read some very good defense for, usually going back to the Greek and Hebrew to show certain nuances. Historicism even had some fairly startling predictions coming out of their interpretations. A few major ones were, well, predicting the fall of Rome, the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, a revolution in France in the late 1700s, and the Ottoman Empire falling under the control of the European nations in 1840. Many of these predictions were several hundred years before the event. Some were right down to the day. On the back burner, I was also considering the problem of evil. I had found that this was also known as theodicy. And a verse had jumped out at me, Revelation 12:17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Many translations state remnant of her seed. Remnant is used in the Bible exactly as it's used today, meaning a leftover small portion. The dragon didn't make war with all the woman's descendants, but with a small portion of her descendants. I was encouraged with the notion that the truth was hidden somewhere among the 30,000 denominations. I was also encouraged by another verse in Revelation 12, verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought his angels. Both these passages seem to confirm that there's an adversary that hates God, and it appears that this adversary will use every tool at his disposal to malign and misrepresent God. God has only one tool, the truth, and with his value of free will, he wouldn't, and maybe even couldn't, force anyone to see his side of the war. I continued to pursue these two interweaving trains of thought, a solid interpretation of prophecy, which seems kind of elusive, and this adversarial being. Did the Bible really teach of such a being, or was it just personification, metaphor, and hyperbole? I was looking for an interpretation that was solid, where all the poked holes had been covered. Greek and Hebrew seemed to have some interesting nuances that I could see in some expositions, but I wasn't knowledgeable enough yet to adopt any particular interpretation and mount my own defense. I found there were only two denominations that currently espouse the historicist interpretation, Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists, both of which are often considered cults. I happened to trip over a book called Kingdom of the Cults, which holds up what it calls the essential Christian doctrines. These core Christian doctrines that anyone who truly considered themselves a biblical follower of Christ would hold. The authors have a long-time radio program called Bible Answer Man and prefer the conservative preterist methodology, which I already knew had glaring holes. Even though I disagreed with them on some of their points, I do enjoy listening to Hank's radio show. This book indicated that the Jehovah's Witnesses were cults, often twisting the biblical text, even creating their own version of the Bible to prop up their beliefs. And even with some abnormal doctrines, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was probably not a cult, as it did hold to these core Christian doctrines. Could the Adventists have the interpretation I was looking for? Given that they've been marginalized in evangelical Christianity, maybe they were the remnant that the dragon was making war with.